Protecting the Earth's biodiversity is something that I know everyone here is wildly engaged in. It's hard, it's constant, it's at our feet. It's at our feet all the time. And I know you're going to hear from really masterminds in this call to action that we are championing at the New York Botanical Garden. When I started here a year and a half, I'm going to confess that as a almost lifelong New Yorker, I grew up in Chicago, but as all my adult life in New York, what I knew about the New York Botanical Garden was mostly the holiday train show, and how beautiful the forest was for walks, more beautiful even than Central Park because it's a native old-growth Lenape forest. But I didn't really know about conservation science or the protection of the Earth's biodiversity in the way that I have now had my comeuppance by learning it like a freight train over the past year and a half, and living it in my own life, paying more attention to all of these things that we're championing being here today. It's a kind of a never-ending struggle, but we're a hopeful crowd, right? We're a hopeful organization. These are could be dire times, but if we all get our hands in the dirt and do this together, then there's a chance that invasive species won't take after. I just joked with Doug Tallamy, who is on the most beautiful necktie with butterflies, and that he should have a spotted lanternfly tie for the next time we invite him back. So it's my pleasure to step down to join you for as much of today as I can, and I'm going to introduce you to Jessica Arcate-Schuler, my colleague, the director of the Thane Family Forest here at the New York Botanical Garden, and she will be your master of ceremonies for the day. Enjoy and be thoughtful, and it's a gorgeous day, so walk around during lunch, get some sun, and come back often. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome. So today we gather as citizens of the earth, right? We are all gardeners, environmentalists, scientists, concerned citizens that have seen significant changes in our natural areas and our ecosystems over the course of our lifetimes. And we're all very concerned about it. And today is a true call to action. So each of us doing our work individually is incredible. But it's really scaling it up and working together in partnership is what makes the big difference for our region and our world and our earth. And that's why it's so incredible that we have the Lower Hudson Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. They consist of 50 partners across our region, the Hudson Valley, that includes Bronx and Manhattan and New York City. And it's remarkable that they are here and funded as one of the 8 prisms across our state. And so the New York State Environmental Protection Fund brings all of these partnerships together. And they are the reason why we're here today. So they have funded us to host this wonderful event and gather us all here. So they established in 2013, and we have been working on a collective mission to protect the rich biodiversity and ecosystems of the Lower Hudson region through partnerships and collaborations that focus on controlling the introduction, spread, and harmful impact of invasive species. So I encourage you all who are here today to also join us, and you can visit our website, lhprism.org. NYBG is a very proud partner, and we hope that you will consider joining us as well. Our next meeting is actually December 5th, so you can mark your calendar and come out. So bringing us together here is truly a team effort. We have many NYBG staff and PRISM partners who participated in organizing this event. And many are here, many are not here, but I just wanted to thank you all for gathering us all in this space. And so our schedule this morning, we have our 3 speakers, Doug Tallamy, Randy Westbrooks, and Carolyn Sears. And then we will have a short panel discussion after all the speakers present. And then we'll break for lunch for about an hour. And then coming back this afternoon, we're really going to have a showcase of our PRISM partners. We have 7 PRISM partners who are going to show their outline of their program, how they've got it going, what their lessons they've learned, and how you can get involved or how you can do something similar in your natural area or even in your backyard. So up first, we have Doug Tallamy. He is professor of the University of Delaware. an award-winning author, and he has a new book coming out, Nature's Best Hope, a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. And this is due out in February 2020, so be on the lookout from Timber Press. And today, Dr. Talame will remind us of many essential roles insects play in our ecosystems and encourage us to make simple changes in our landscapes and our attitudes to keep insects on the ground, in the air, and yes, on our plants. So let's welcome Doug.
Thank you. I can't see any of you. But I know you're out there. All right, today I want to ask the question. We're talking about invasive plants, but there are still people out there that wonder whether they are good or bad, and maybe they're not so bad, and maybe we shouldn't worry about them. So that's the question I want to address. Are alien plants bad? Remember that all invasive species are alien. They are non-native. But I have been taken to task for that title, particularly the word alien. That has negative connotations. People think of aliens. So they suggest, well, maybe you should call them exotics. And a lot of people do, but to me, exotic has a lot of positive connotations, and I think that pushes it in the wrong direction. Out-of-towners has been suggested, and that's accurate. They're all out-of-towners or introduced. And I'm actually going to stick with the word introduced because they all are introduced, most of them purposefully, some by accident. But I've also been taken to task for the word bad. They say that's judgmental. Well, I'm going to push back on that because the terms good and bad are relative terms. We can measure them, good and bad, compared to what? We can measure them with that subjectivity. So let's do an example here. Is Doug Talame good or bad at basketball? Well, the answer is it depends. Good or bad compared to what? So if I'm comparing myself to my 3-year-old granddaughter, I'm pretty good. She can't hold the basketball. But when I go up against LeBron James, it's not as good. He almost always gets past me. All right, so our introduced plants bad. We're going to stick with that title. We have two choices when we're building landscapes. We can build landscapes that support life, support the nature around us, or we can build landscapes that are ecologically dead. If we choose the first option, we can sustain the human enterprise. If we choose the second option, we cannot. So what we want to do is build landscapes that actually support nature, and in most places we've taken it away, so we have to restore it. And in order to restore it, we have to understand what nature is. It is a series of specialized relationships. And most of those specialized relationships involve insects. So we can't ignore insects even though we are gardeners. So for example, if you want to have those two beautiful moths in your yard, that is the goldenrod stowaway. It's a misnomer because it has nothing to do with goldenrod. And that's what its beautiful caterpillar looks like. You have to have Biden's aristosa. You have to have ditch daisy because that is the only plant that it will develop on. If you want acorn weevils, you have to have acorns. And you're not going to have acorns without oak trees. There's no other option there. You're not going to have pileated woodpeckers unless you have access to lots of carpenter ants because that's what they rear their young on. And you won't have 13 species of native bees unless you have sunflowers and not the big showy ones because those bees will only reproduce on the pollen of sunflowers. That's in New England. You won't have Phlox divaricata unless you have its pollinator. So this is phlox from my yard. I get to watch it. It spreads readily from seed, but only if it's pollinated. And if you look at the entrance to that corolla, it's really small, really narrow. I watch native bees land on those flowers and try to get their mouth parts in there, and they can't do it. So who is pollinating our phlox? Well, it turns out to be day-flying sphinx moths. Things like this hummingbird sphinx or this snowberry clearwing. They have really long tongues, and they sink them deep into the corolla of those flowers. And when they pull them out, they are covered with pollen. And they fly to the next flower, and that's how you get your phlox pollinated. So you can get your phlox pollinated if you have adult snowberry clearwings, and you can have adult snowberry clearwings if you have larval snowberry clearwings. And you can have larval snowberry clearwings if you have coral honeysuckle, the native honeysuckle, because that is their host plant. So we're talking about specialized relationships that involve insects. They are the rule in the natural world. They are not the exception, and of course, they always start with plants. Today, the specialized relationships that form much of nature are threatened by the creation of what we call novel ecosystems. And that term was coined by Richard Hobbs. He says novel ecosystems are simply ecosystems in which organisms are coming together for the first time in evolutionary history. They have no evolutionary history together. And that means they have not had the time to build those specialized relationships, those co-evolved interactions that form much of nature. So the question I want to address today is, does that matter? Does it matter whether ecosystems are novel with a bunch of new organisms or whether they're the old ones that co-evolved together? So the question is, do introduced organisms, novel, evolutionary novel species, have a net positive or a net negative effect on the ecosystems that they enter? And again, there's still controversy about this. People say, well, invasive species aren't always so bad. Maybe we want them. And as a matter of fact, there is it's a minority, but there is some scientific literature out there where these questions are asked about whether or not plant invasions are bad. They say, well, there's no global extinctions recorded from mainland invasions. There are from islands, but not from mainlands. I guess islands don't count. Post-invasion species richness, the number of species after an invasion is higher. Birds don't care whether a berry is native or not. Invaded communities are different, but not inappropriate. I don't know what that means. Introduced plants are here to stay, so we should embrace them, and invasion is just another word for change. This is in the literature. More. Introduced species can provide important benefits to ecosystems, so maybe they're not so bad. Returning ecosystems to some mythical pristine state is a fool's errand, so we shouldn't bother. And shouldn't there be a statute of limitations on being alien? That's actually a very good question. We're gonna address that. Mark Davis, a plant ecologist at Macalester College, says, don't judge a plant by its origins, judge it by its function. And I completely agree with that. We're just gonna focus on function. We don't care where it comes from. So the question is, what is the impact of introduced plants, of these novel plants, on ecosystem function? If introduced plants are the functional equivalent of the native plants that they're replacing, then there should be no impact on ecosystem function. Our ecosystems will look different, but they will function just as well. So that is question one. Do novel ecosystems function as well as co-evolved ecosystems? Well, that means we have to be able to measure ecosystem function, and that is not easy. But people have been thinking about it for a long time. Robert MacArthur, way back in 1955, suggested that as you add species to an ecosystem, it will function better. It is more stable and it is more productive. And of course, the opposite is true. As you take species out of a system, it becomes more unstable and functions more poorly. Again, very difficult to measure. You have to measure ecosystems over long periods. You have to control them. You have to remove species and add species. So he didn't measure it. He just called it the law of nature, and that was that. But a number of teams have measured that in the following decades. Here's just a few of them. And Robert MacArthur was a very smart guy. It turns out he was absolutely right. There's a very strong relationship between the number of species in an ecosystem and ecosystem function. And that's good news for us because now we can measure ecosystem function by simply counting the number of species in an ecosystem. So that leads us to question two. Do novel ecosystems, do invaded ecosystems, contain as many species as co-evolved ecosystems? We have 3,300 species of invasive plants that are running amok in North America. So if you've added 3,300 species to the species richness of North America, shouldn't our ecosystems be functioning better? Because now we have more species, according to MacArthur. Well, the answer is it's a matter of scale. It's a matter of where you measure that ecosystem function. Ecosystems don't function on a continental level. They function on a local level. So we have to count species locally after an invasion. So let's do that. Are there more species locally after an invasion than before an invasion? This is an invasion of porcelain berry near my house. That's what it looks like. This is porcelain berry in Cape May, New Jersey. This is a walnut, that's a black cherry, this is a sweet gum, I forget what they were. I crawled in there. They're all dead, of course. So that 5 species of trees there are now reduced to 1 species of alien vine. This is what happens after a cheatgrass invasion. So here's a sagebrush community before cheatgrass invasion. This is what it looks like afterwards, because cheatgrass changes the fire regime and it kills all the diverse sagebrush community. This is Melaleuca in the Florida Everglades. Florida Everglades is the river of grass, not anymore. This is Kogon grass in the southeast. The diverse forest floor community is now 1 species. This is Phragmites all over the place. This is spotted knapweed. This is autumn olive, again, near my house. So typically, invaded ecosystems contain far fewer species than uninvaded ecosystems. And you don't have to believe me. You can go and read all those papers. And I stopped listing them because I ran out of room. But there's plenty of evidence that locally invaded ecosystems have far fewer species, which means they are not functioning as well. So the local loss of plant species is not something that I think we should embrace. And I don't think we should name our roads after them. And I don't think we should spell it wrong when we do it. Okay, next question. What do introduced plants do to plant-insect interactions? Remember, insects are really, really important here. What's happening to those interactions? Well, we can measure what happens when we replace native plant communities with introduced plants, and we've been doing that in my lab for a number of years now. I'm going to quickly go through a little bit of data in case you still need to be convinced. This is what we define as the Mid-Atlantic region, and what we did was just look up host plant records for caterpillars, for Lepidoptera, the ones that are recorded as eating particular plant genera. And so just for woody plants, if you look at the yellow bar, only that is total Lepidoptera. There's a 90% reduction in host records from native plants to non-native plants. So a loss of 90% of the Lepidoptera. There is the possibility, we wondered, that if you introduce a plant that is a close relative of native plants, in other words, it's a congener, it's in the same genus, possibly insects that are related to, or that are adapted to our local plants might be able to use this closely related congener. So we asked the question, when the non-native plant is closely related, does that matter to the insects? Maybe it doesn't matter at all. Well, it does matter. We did a common garden experiment with 19 different congeneric comparisons. Here's the total here. There was a 65% reduction, even though we're talking about close relatives. And that's true for generalist species and for specialist species. That was the abundance. This is the number of species. 58% reduction in the number of species. So these native insects were not able to use those related congeners nearly as well as we thought they might be able to. To be fair, we compared it to unrelated introduced plants as well, and we get a bigger reduction, 80% reduction in abundance and 78% reduction in the number of species. So there's no evidence so far that our native insects are able to use these non-native plants. Well, those were controlled common garden experiments where we picked the species, which is not what happens in nature. In nature, or what's left of nature, you get these really thuggish invasives that are taking over. So we went into some natural systems. These are hedgerows in Maryland and Delaware and Pennsylvania, and measured caterpillar communities in hedgerows that were invaded. There's a lot of autumn olive and lots of other stuff. Compared it to the caterpillar communities and hedgerows that were not invaded, and we got a 68% reduction in the species that could use those invaded hedgerows, a 91% reduction in the abundance of those caterpillars, and a 96% reduction in the biomass. So if we're thinking of insects as bird food, we just reduced bird food by 96% when we allow it to be invaded by these non-native plants. And some people have suggested that Mr. Common Yellowthroat here can compensate for the loss of food by foraging 96% harder. But of course, those people don't know birds. You can't do that because he's already foraging all day long. 156 trips a day, 1 trip every 5 minutes. The prediction is you will have 96% less bird biomass in an area where you take away their food. So what if I said to you, introduced plants have reduced your bank account by 96%? You would get it that that's not good. What I'm trying to do is to get that idea into our culture, because insects are the currency in our ecological bank account. And it is our ecological bank account that keeps us alive on planet Earth. So we cannot afford to reduce those insect populations because they are literally keeping us alive on planet Earth. Insects are also the currency in the ecological bank accounts of other organisms. It's not just all about humans, believe it or not. So I'm going to share a little bit of data from a recent student I have, Desiree Narango, who studied chickadee reproduction in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. She looked at how well they could reproduce in relation to the plants in the foraging range where they were trying to reproduce, whether those plants were native or non-native. Let me remind you that chickadees need a lot of caterpillars to successfully reproduce, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to get to the babies to the point of fledging, and then a lot more after they fledge. So here's a picture of one of Desiree's families that she followed. She followed a lot of chickadee families over a 3-year period. The star is where the nest is. The red line is the foraging territory. They did 96% of their foraging within that red line. And the blue areas are the trees on which they did that foraging. And they were all the native trees in this landscape. Remember, this is inside the Beltway in D.C., so this is right where we are living. We got basswood and sweet gum, American elm, black cherry, 2 species of oaks. But the trees that they were ignoring, the trees they were not foraging on to get any food, included all those trees from Asia. So Japanese maples and silk trees, our friend the ginkgo, black poplar, crepe myrtle, saucer magnolia. And when you have landscapes that are dominated by non-native plants, we can compare what the chickadees are doing in landscapes that are dominated by native plants. And when Desiree did that, she found that the landscapes dominated by non-natives produced 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, we reduced the amount of food for the chickadees by 75%. They were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. So the chickadees came, they looked around. There's a nest box there. They want to use that, but they're probably second-year birds who were smart enough to know that there's not enough food in that landscape, so they didn't even bother to build a nest. If they did bother, those nests contain 1.5 fewer eggs. They were 29% less likely to survive, to make it through to fledging. They produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and they did it slower. It took 1.5 days longer. And you might say, well, those aren't huge differences. But if you take all that information and put it into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of non-native plant biomass in your landscape, this is what you get. The dotted line is replacement rate. That is the rate at which the chickadees have to reproduce in order to replace the adults that die each year. So if you reproduce at this rate, you have a stable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking. If you reproduce above that dotted line, you have a growing population, but anything below that dotted line is a declining population. These lines intersect here at around 30% non-native plants. So if you have 70% of your landscape plant biomass native, you can have a growing or stable chickadee population. But if you have anything above 30% non-native plants, then you have a declining and unsustainable chickadee population. So this is good news for 2 reasons. It's the first time that this has been measured for any bird anywhere, which directly shows that birds that want to breed with us, that want to use our landscapes, want to share the land with us, are unable to do it unless we pick the right plants. Your plant choice matters to the things that want to live with us. It also suggests that we have room for compromise right here. If you can pick a plant that's not native, as long as it's not invasive, and still have a stable chickadee population. So I think this is good news. You know, I looked up compromise in the dictionary the other day. It's not there anymore. So this study might be able to put it back in the dictionary, and that'll be good. Okay, Desiree also looked at the migrating birds that stopped by her research plots, again, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. 51 species of migrants used her plots in the spring in order to refuel. You know, people say they're resting, they fly at night, and they've got to rest. They do have to rest, but they have to eat. They have to gas up so they can continue their migration north. 51 species. And if they come down in the land of burning bush or the land of ginkgo or all these non-natives that we use, there's nothing to eat. And that's the end of their migration. So they're very scary statistics about 3 billion fewer birds around and 432 bird species at risk of extinction. You know, starving them with the plants that we use in our landscapes is certainly one of the reasons why that's happening. Point is, introduced plants destroy food web interactions. Okay, let's address another question. Do birds care whether a berry is native or not? Well, good question, because we see birds eating non-native berries. But the interaction between, or the relationship between birds and berries is another one of these co-evolved relationships. Plants want their seeds dispersed, and they want them dispersed by something that's going to carry them far away, and birds do a good job at that. So they've covered their seeds with a tasty morsel, and we call that a berry. Then the bird eats that berry and flies away and then poops out the seed someplace else, and that's how the plant gets its seed around. Well, the plant wants to attract birds at the time of year that it wants its seeds dispersed. So if you want your seeds dispersed in the summertime, you put the nutrition that the bird needs in that berry that's appropriate for summertime. So if you want it done in the summertime, like blueberries here, you load it with sugar, make it very sweet. Because birds have just finished reproducing where they're eating a lot of insects that are high in fat and protein, but not high in sugar. So they want to beef up on their carbohydrates. It's a great way to get your summer berries dispersed. If you want your berries dispersed in the fall, though, you want them high in fat, because birds want high-fat berries in the fall. If they're migrating, they need the energy from the fat, and if they're not migrating, they need to build up their fat reserves to make it through the winter. So things like poison ivy berries, very, very, very good. If you want your seed dispersed late in the winter, then like our ilex here, Ilex verticillata, there's another boost in sugar. So these berries are not tasty all winter long, but they thaw and they freeze and they thaw and freeze, and the sugar content increases so that late winter they become sweet again. Remember, the birds are about ready to enter a period of reproduction where they're doing all that fat and protein from insects, so they want carbohydrates before they do that. That's the seasonal change of what the birds are looking for from the nutrition of berries. A woman named Susan Smith, who has gotten married, and I can't remember her last name, has been studying the difference between native berries and non-native berries to see whether they are equal in what birds are looking for nutritionally. So here's just looking at the fat content of berries produced in the fall. Our native berries, so things like wax myrtle, 50% fat, native viburnums, almost 49% fat, spice bush, 48% fat, native dogwoods, 35%, even Virginia creeper, 24%. That's very high in fat compared to non-native berries that are produced in the fall. Things like multiflora rose, less than 1% fat. Our non-native laniceras, the honeysuckles, 0.7% fat. Buckthorn, 0.5% fat. Ugly Agnes, 2% fat. Oriental bittersweet. So these berries from Asia, from what she's looked at so far, are very high in sugar in the fall and very low in fat in the fall. So it's not what the birds need. So she's continuing her research, but it looks like most, maybe all of these non-native berries are phenologically out of sync with the physiological needs of our birds. They're producing high sugar berries in the fall instead of the summer. Why, you might say, well, why are the birds eating those berries? You know, if you look at an invasion, they're often the only berries that are around, those non-native berries. So, and also, they're eating high sugar berries when they need high fat. We kind of do that, you know. We eat a lot of sugar that we don't need, so how can we blame the birds? Okay, if an alien plant supports a particular butterfly, bee, or beetle, is it contributing to ecosystem function? So you get a plus from this alien plant, but you have to also measure the minuses to see whether you're getting a net benefit or not. You can't just measure one side without measuring the other side. And let me give you an example here. This is kudzu. If you go south, you know what kudzu is. And you know, this is what the edge of the Smokies look like. They're pulling down the trees, marching their way right through the Smokies. Well, the silver-spotted skipper, a native skipper, has moved over. It is using kudzu, and I can verify that. That is a picture of a silver-spotted skipper larva that I took inside of a kudzu leaf. So they really are using it. You have gained a species by having kudzu around. But have you lost anything? Well, this is what kudzu does, and all the plants that used to be there are now gone. So you've lost your violets, which means you've lost your fritillaries. You've lost your milkweed, so you've lost the monarch and all the other things that milkweeds support. You've lost any of the plants that get covered by kudzu. So there are 11 species of caterpillars supported by spicebush. That's gone. Smilax, what is that? Greenbrier, thank you. Supports 19 different species, 32 species on Virginia creeper, 35 species on sweet gum. Celtis, 43 species of caterpillars gone. If we lose our viburnums, that's 104 more species, 110 species on goldenrod, 129 on black walnut, 215 on elms, 297 on maples. And the big one, of course, are oaks, 557 on oaks. And you can easily picture a kudzu plant growing right over that plant. And then, of course, you lose all the birds that need all of those caterpillars, the thousands and thousands of caterpillars required to enable those birds to reproduce. So we've gained the silver-spotted skipper, but we've lost thousands of other species. That's not something I want to encourage. We have to look at the net change. Okay, returning ecosystems to some mythical, pristine state is a fool's errand. That's not the goal. That's not my goal anyway. It is true. We humans have completely changed what was the starting point before we wiped out the large Pleistocene mammals. But that doesn't mean we can't reconstruct ecosystem function in an awful lot of the areas where we are. We can put the players that know each other back. They may not be the exact same players that used to be there, but it doesn't have to be the original pristine state, whatever that was, in order for it to be a functioning ecosystem. Second question, shouldn't there be a statute of limitations on being alien? Okay, that is a good question. And the question is, when does an introduced plant become a native? So we humans consider ourselves natives to North America, but we've only been here 14,000 years. We evolved in Africa. That's really where we're native to. But we tend to think of plants in the same way. You can determine whether a plant is behaving like a native or not by going to where it is native and looking at the way it behaves there. So here are just some comparisons. This is Phragmites, a common reed, common around here for sure. It comes from Europe, the European genotype, where it supports 170 species of insects. Well, it was packing material on some of our earliest ships, so it's ships. It has been here over 300 years, in some cases 400 years, still only supports 5 species after being here that long. So some species have jumped over onto it. Adaptation is happening, but very, very slowly. When will it become a full functioning native? Like it is in Europe, who knows? 100,000 years, 500,000 years, maybe never, I don't know. But in the meantime, it's pushing out an awful lot of species that already are functional natives. Eucalyptus from Australia supports 48 species. It's been in California over 100 years, supports 1 species over there. Here's the Melaleuca in Florida. It's a rare plant in Australia, and I can see why. It supports 409 species of insects. After 120 years, which is actually now 140 years in Florida, supports 8 species. So again, adaptation is happening, but not nearly as fast as people think. All right, let's revisit whether plant invasions are bad. Remember, no global extinctions recorded from mainland invasions. That's going to change because there's something going on now called introgression with a few plants. American bittersweet and red mulberry, for example, are hybridizing with Asiatic bittersweet and white mulberry. And through introgression, the very next generation is almost entirely the non-native. That's what happened with the Africanized bees. And so there is no more white mulberry where I come from. I've heard you have to go to Texas to find it now. The American bittersweet, you have to go to Maine to find it. So everybody thinks they have it, but it's really the non-native. We're going to lose those species through integration, and that will be true extinctions on a mainland. But why is extinction the first measure of something that's wrong? That's like saying I'm not going to go to the doctor until I'm dead. So I think that's the wrong metric right there. Post-invasion species richness is higher. No, it's not. Not locally, not where ecosystems are functioning. It is drastically lower. Invaded communities are different, but not inappropriate. Still don't know what that means. Introduced plants are here to stay, so we should embrace them. Well, you know, disease is here to stay. Cancer is here to stay. Should we embrace that? I don't get that. So are introduced plants bad? Well, they are bad at supporting insects, and we've got empirical data to back that up, which means they're bad at supporting insectivores. I didn't talk about specialist pollinators, but I will very quickly. There are a number of pollinators that can only rear their young on the pollen of particular species of plants, or at least particular genera of plants. Remember, we have 4,000 species of native bees. We know very little about most of them, but in order for them to reproduce, you have to have the genus of plant on which they have specialized, just like those herbivorous insects. So if you bring in a plant from Asia, it's not going to satisfy those specialist pollinators. They're bad for complex food webs. When you take species out of your food web, it is now much more vulnerable to disruption. It is not stable. There you go. They're unstable food webs. It's bad for local diversity. It's bad for interaction diversity, all of those plant-insect interactions we talked about. And it's bad for ecosystem function because there are fewer species in those ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Doug. So our next speaker is Dr. Randy Westbrooks. And Dr. Westbrooks is an invasive species biologist who actually just recently was contracted by New York State DEC to assess a non-native species here in New York State to help the state understand what the threats are up and coming. And it's a really big job, and I'm really glad that Dr. Westbrooks could be here and talk to us a little bit more about the angle of prevention, preventing future invasive species. So let's welcome Dr. Westbrooks to talk about early detection and rapid response.
Good morning. It is so great to see you here. This is amazing. They told me a while ago there are 448 seats in here. That means there's at least 500 people in this room. This is just awesome. Well, Dr. Talamy really opened this up. Now, let's think about some things that we can do from a very practical standpoint. So I've spent the last 40 years to come to today. Because I can tell you, after working with the Department of Environmental Conservation, you're in a very good situation right now because we have a complete mess down south where I grew up and I live now in North Carolina. And what is changing is climate. But you can see what is happening in Virginia and Maryland and North Carolina and South Carolina. And it's going to come here like kudzu. And that's really what this is about today. It's giving you some ideas of how to go forward. Okay, I grew up in upstate South Carolina, went to the University of South Carolina, and my first job after teaching high school for a while was as a port inspector in the Port of Charleston. And I just want to show you something. The first day I went in there in the federal building in January 1979, they gave me three things that blew my mind. And you can probably understand this. They gave me a hatchet and a chisel and a flashlight. What in the world would they give me? They want me to chop wood? I have a master's degree in biology, and it just shows how ignorant we were. We had no idea what these people were doing at the port of entry in Charleston, South Carolina, to stop the introduction of the things that Dr. Talamy is talking about. That's what it takes. If you look at it right there, all the things like that. Laurel wilt disease. was brought in, and it is killing red bay and swamp bay coming up the east coast, and crates of cargo into the Port of Savannah in 2002. And so people are looking for those kind of beetles. So that was my first job. That's how I got involved with this, right there. And that was in 1979. In 1986, I was recruited to start working with Dr. Bob Epley up in North Carolina on the witchweed eradication program, which is a parasitic weed of corn. And that led to everything else you're going to hear about today, like giants of it, and everything that is coming your way. If it's not already here, it's going to come your way. And you are the people that are going to make the difference. So I just want to think about right now what was happening in 1876 at the Philadelphia Centennial when those people were bringing kudzu in as an ornamental porch vine. What were they thinking? If we were there, we wouldn't know any better either. So what is happening right now? We can make a great difference, because in 100 years, they'll be looking back and saying, they did it or they didn't. But I got to tell you that it is so great to see you here today, because I know you are the ones that are going to make this happen. And I have talked to people all over the world, all over the United States, and this is just amazing to see you in here. Because if this is just one of the 8 prisms, okay, 500 times 8, okay, wow, that is just amazing. 4,000 people in New York State to work with. Oh, I just love it. I absolutely love it, because people will talk to me all the time. They will sit and listen. Oh, yeah, we agree, and then nothing happens in North Carolina or South Carolina. We're just so busy just dealing with these individual things. But yeah, I know you are here, and you're going to make a big difference. This is Steve Manning that I've worked with since I retired 7 years ago because of budget issues, by the way. And Steve is the one, he has a company if you need people to come and do actual invasive plant control for you. He's based in Tennessee. He has teams that go out and work all over the country. Anyway, but Steve called and told me about this potential contract with the DEC 2 years ago, just about at this time. So I have to say thank you, because it's been an absolutely amazing process for me to get reconnected to invasive species management and prevention with the DEC. So we got this contract to do 150 reports, and so far we have done 124 reports on all kinds of things. And here are the examples right now that have been done. Number 1 was Italian arum. And Dave Adams, I don't know if Dave is here today, but you can find out all about these reports that we've done. It was just an amazing process for me, a re-educational process to be able to reconnect the way I was doing when I was the National Invasive Species Coordinator for APHIS for plants, and when I did for the Beach Vitex Risk Assessment in 2008. It's just been great to be able to do it, and you can see the other ones that we've done. And the last one we've done, which we've heard about, spotted lanternfly. That's the one that we just finished last month. So there you are. And all I can say is I am so glad you're here, and it is just great to see what you're going to do. Okay, this is our home. We've been there, and we moved from Charleston in 1986. Our son John is sitting right up there at the front, at the top. John is a home health physical therapist. You ever have trouble with your back, call John Westbrooks. He's sitting right up there. He can tell you all about it. But he grew up listening to us talk about these kind of things. My wife, Becky, is a science educator. She couldn't come with us this time. She had to stay home and take care of John's his dogs down in Wilmington, but she is a science educator. She's been teaching 46 years. This is the home of the Venus flytrap in the Carolina coastal plain. And you can tell where we are over there from Wilmington, west of Wilmington. That's where we live now. And we moved there in 1986 for me to work with Dr. Epley to develop methods for controlling witchweed, a parasitic weed of corn I'll tell you about in a little bit. But anyway, this is what Becky spent so much of her time working on as an instructor at Southeastern Community College in Whiteville, and that is to do tissue culturing for a Venus flytrap. And if you just look at this right here, people just love Venus flytraps all over the world. But I want to tell you, it only grows in a small area around Wilmington, North Carolina, there on the coast, okay? This is the future of Venus flytrap if we don't stop it now. It was brought into Alabama about 1920 to be used as a pasture grass. It has become a horrible weed throughout the South. It's not really become a problem in our area, but this is what it looks like when it grows, okay? And this is what's at risk. And unless we stop it, it's going to destroy the native habitat. You talk about fires, this thing has induces terrible forest fires. And so we will probably have to tissue culture Venus flytrap. There will be no native habitat unless we stop it now. This is an example of early detection and rapid response. The question is, do we care about Venus flytrap enough in the Carolina coastal plain to stop this mess? The question is, I think we do, but we've got to get started on it. I'll talk about Kogon grass in just a little while. But anyway, I wanted to give you a little perspective here about how we are changing things on the earth. It was so good to listen to Dr. Talamy talk about this. The natural movement of continents from 180 million years ago when we had Pangea, all the continents together, to the way it is now spread up into Wallace's realms, about 180 million years. Okay, but now you can go from California to China in about 15 hours in a plane. If California is actually moving toward China at about 1 foot per year, so that's like 35 million years. And North Carolina to eastern Australia is about 9,600 miles, 50 million years, 21 hours by plane. This is what we have done to the planet. And Dr. Talamy, this is the term that I would like to say that we're creating right now, the geological era called the Homogocene. Unless we stop it, we have to make this choice because it's not going to stop unless we make a choice to do something about it. Anyway, people will not live like this, okay? If you had a neighbor like this, you would say, you've got to clean up this mess, okay? Well, how about this right here? This is Beach Vitex that was introduced by the NC State Arboretum in 1986 as an ornamental dune plant. It's very similar to azalea, but it's a vine, okay? And so by the early 1990s, it was been planted everywhere down along the coast in Charleston and that area down in there. And it was beginning to take over the dunes. And so I got a call in 1998 from a friend of mine from the Corps of Engineers in Charleston who said, this thing is interfering with the dune restoration project from the Corps of Engineers. Can you help us figure out how to stop this thing? So by that time, I was the National Invasive Plant Coordinator for USDA APHIS. And so I was still in North Carolina. And I called up these folks that I work with in USDA in Washington and told them about it and said, we really need to do something. The Corps of Engineers really thinks that we've got to stop this thing, you know, because I was managing all the federal noxious weed programs at the time, like witchweed and things like that. And I'll never forget what they told me. They said, now, you just remember this. You tell your friends down there that if they want something done, to get somebody to call Congress and give us some money, and we'll send you some money tomorrow. But it doesn't work the other way around. You don't tell us what to do. And that was the end of it right then. Then in 2003, a lady named Betsy Brabson, who was a sea turtle volunteer from Georgetown, South Carolina, which is between Myrtle Beach and Charleston, called me up and said, the people at Clemson said that maybe you could help us with this problem, this thing called beach vitex. And I said, where have I heard of beach vitex? Oh, I heard about it several years ago. They said, this thing is interfering with sea turtle nesting here on the coast because this thing is crowding out all the sea oats where it's planted. And so I remembered what they had told me. I said, well, maybe we need to get together and have some kind of meeting. And so we did. We formed the Beach Vitex Task Force. And so over the next 10 years, just about all of this has been eradicated from South Carolina, and there's some in North Carolina and in Virginia. I don't think there's any up here yet that I have heard of. people that were planning this thing were really fussing at us for doing this. This was a condominium area down in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, just above Charleston. And this is, you can see where it's planted, how it was spreading over the dunes. And they said, look, it's such a beautiful plant when it makes these flowers. You can't tell us to stop planting this thing here. And then we had a nor'easter storm in the spring of 2005 that just about, it washed away the primary dune almost totally in front of those same condominiums. And guess what? Oh, they came and joined the task force. And the difference is what we're talking about today is how we get people to engage in this, okay? And when it is something that you just love, they're going to say, you can't stop us from doing this. But then when it affects you economically, oh God, we got to do something today. And I think that it's going to come down to a lot of education. And I can tell you that we got to start with little children. The way they did us baby boomers, Dr. Talamy, back in the 60s when they taught us about protecting the environment from chemical pollution and all the things that we learned, and our parents, I can remember my dad changing the oil in his car and then taking it and dumping it out in the ditch beside the house. And I said, Dad, you are polluting the environment. He said, what are you talking about? Where do you think oil came from? It came out of the ground. The difference between the people from World War II and the baby boomers and everybody else is what we were taught when we were this big. So I think that there's a lot we can do as our generation to work on this, but I really feel like that the next generation, we right now, our sons, Matthew and his wife Caroline have twins, Maddie and Brady. They're 6 going on 30, if you know what I mean. And they need to be taught these same things that we were taught about Rachel Carson and protecting the environment back in the 1960s. I really feel that needs to be part of your agenda here. It's not just going out and doing this, but teaching these people so that when they get to be 30 or 40 years old, they will understand why this matters. Because I can remember so well hearing about Rachel Carson and protecting the environment in the Weekly Reader. You all remember the Weekly Reader? The little newspaper we got once a week in elementary school in 1963. You can tell how old I am. I just turned 66. How could this be possible? 66. Got my first Social Security check about 2 days ago. Wasn't very much, but anyway, it's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. This is the one I want you to look at right here, okay? This is the one that we are dealing with throughout the South, brought in, as I said, the Philadelphia Centennial in 1876, and it just grows so fast, you can see that. And look here, people. It's coming, but you have an opportunity to stop it. Please take that opportunity to take. This is a great example of that. So, America the Beautiful. This is what it looked like to begin with back in the days when we first started settling this. In 1776, farming cities like this were really islands in a sea of wilderness. And look at it now. Natural areas are islands in a sea of disturbance, from sea to shining sea. So what's it going to look like in 100 years? And that is our choice. That is our choice. And that is why I'm here today. So this land is your land. About 39% of the U.S. is public lands. There's at least 1,300 to 1,500 invasive plants in the United States. Do any of these interfere with the goals you have for land management? The fact is there are 36,000 more weeds in the world that Rod Randall from Western Australia has documented. He's a weed geographer. How many are on your land right now that you get to manage? Okay, 36,000, and we have something around 1,500 that are really bad like kudzu. Just think how many thousands more there could be in another 100 years unless we make some kinds of changes. And I'm not here to advocate more laws. because as I said, I was the aphis weed program coordinator. We have a federal Noxious Weed Act. We can add things like witchweed to it. So the fact is, in 100 years from today, I'll be 166. I may be like Les Meerhoff. Some of you may remember him from the University of Connecticut. Les left us in 2010. He was 60 years old. I think he's on another planet. I really do. I think he's doing great things. I think when you leave this life, you go someplace else and you do great things. But the fact is, we need to take care of this while we can, while we're here. Okay? Invasive species, as I said, we got about 50,000 introduced plants and animals. We have things like beavers become a problem because we're removing the top predators. We have impacts on human health, a lot of ecological impacts and economic impacts. This is the #2 threat to endangered species. About 40 of 958 endangered species are endangered because of these invasive species that we have brought here either on purpose or by accident. And then economic impacts, about $150 billion. Boy, we could use that on some other things if we could. So the root of the problem is that most people aren't involved with this. So what is amazing to me is I know you understand this. The question is, how can we get all these other people to see the same things that the baby boomers learned from Rachel Carson and all those people about 60 years ago? So maybe we need to think with Dr. Tallamy, how can we bring education into this and at least get the next generation coming up to understand what we know? I know you know this. How do we get all these other people in New York City to understand what we're talking about? That's the challenge. So where do they fit in our priorities? As I said, in the early 1900s, we went to a lot of efforts to make sure that we could protect our crops. And then in the 1950s, as I said, we began to develop methods to protect the environment and human health. Now, I call this biosecurity. How can we protect our natural resources that Dr. Tallamy is talking about? That is so important. It's not just the economic stuff. We already have good laws in place for crop protection and for environmental protection. We need to move forward with this a little bit on biological protection, and that is something that we need to think about and think and think and think, because there's no easy answer, because I've been doing this for 40 years, and I can tell you that everybody will shake their head and agree, but the question is, how do we move forward? And after working in this project with DEC here, I can tell you, I think you may be the first state that will actually come up with the answers that are actually needed. Maybe you'll become the role model for everybody else because you know what's coming. And I think that you have the guts and the stamina and the brains and everything else to go out and do it because of what I have seen here. But it is coming. The tsunami is coming. The biological tsunami is coming. 4 types of invasive species: aquatic nuisance species like zebra mussel, injurious wildlife, insects and diseases, and invasive plants, of course. This is coming up the coast, okay? I don't know if it's here in New York yet, but this was introduced from Hurricane Andrew in 1992 into the Atlantic Ocean and in Miami, and it's been spreading up the coast, where it is a complete threat to native snappers and grouper fish. And so this is one of those things where, okay, we can get rid of kudzu, but the question is, how do you get rid of this? I don't know that we can. So this is one that you look and say, don't bring anything else into this country like this. Because once it gets into the ocean here, there's not a whole lot we can do. Yeah, they have the little derbies down there around Palm Beach to get people to go out and find the biggest one and the smallest one and get $1,000 for the day. But that doesn't get rid of it. So this is an example of an aquatic one. This is the one that I think back and just think that you will relate to because of this being brought into New York in the early 1900s as a street tree into Brooklyn in the early 1900s. Imagine what it looked like There it is. There it is. And it's not there anymore. Laurel wilt disease is something that is brand new. It was brought in by the red ambrosia beetle, as I said earlier. It is killing all of our red bay trees and swamp bay trees up and down the coast from Alabama up to New Jersey. I don't think red bay grows here, but if with climate it may spread up here even naturally. But the mortality is caused by this laurel wilt disease, and it is a threat to red bay, swamp bay, sassafras, and people would say, yeah, we're so sorry about that. But the thing that may actually help us with this is it is a direct threat to avocado production in South Florida. Like foot and mouth disease kills cows, this kills avocado trees who they're growing on purpose down there to sell to us in grocery stores. And so if they figure out how to control this thing to protect avocados, maybe we'll be able to use some of that information in state parks and national parks to protect our native red bay and swamp bay, which are sort of like dogwood trees. They're not big timber trees like a chestnut tree or something like that. But here's the collateral damage that I want to make sure you see. The Palomino swallowtail butterfly depends on these native trees, okay? And when they don't have them to live on, they're going to go too, as Dr. Talamy said. They're going to go extinct too. There is nothing else for them to eat because they evolved to eat red bay and swamp bay. So this is what it looked like in 2012, where it was, starting from Savannah, spreading up to the Carolinas. And here's what it looks like now in 2015, and as you can see, it's just spreading up the coast. And there's not a whole lot we can do. All I can pray is that they come up with some way to protect avocados in South Florida, because I do like avocados. Then we'll find out how to control this in the natural areas as well. But anyway, we have 750,000 plants, 36,000 documented invasive plants, 5,000 plants introduced into America with at least 1,300 to 1,500 introduced here, and we're losing about $25 billion a year because of losses and control costs. So 97% of the world's weeds are not here yet. Write that down, 97%. We only have 3%. So what's it going to be like in 500 years? It's our choice. Here's some local opportunities, you know, and I wanted to show some kudzu. Of course, these are things that we have big problems with down south, but you can see it's beginning to spread up here. This is one boat right away from all your lakes, okay, that right there. And this is spread by birds, and this has been spread by people, as an example. Now, we have prescriptive public welfare laws that tell us we got to have clean air and clean water. But these laws here, federal and state plant protection laws, say that you can, may, might, should be able to do this if you can find enough money and if you got political support. And that works most of the time. It does give us authority to do things at the state and federal level. But that is the main difference between these kind of laws up here that the EPA and the USDA work under. So it all comes down to this right here. So this is pre-clearance. The first line of defense is to keep it out of the country to begin with. Where I used to work in Charleston as a port inspector, exclusion at ports of entry. And this is what I want to finish up with talking today for the next few minutes. And that is early detection, containment, and eradication, okay? Because if you don't do that, this is kudzu right here. But it does come down to, will you take care of kudzu on your land, which is another form of EDR, at least on your land. You can't take responsibility for your neighbor's property, but if you get kudzu on your land, yes, go get rid of it. And that is a type of biological protection ethic that we need for our generation and the future, starting with the 6-year-olds going on 30. EDRR is not a new idea. This is my dad. He was a country boy, grew up in upstate South Carolina. And when they would grow cotton, they would just get out there and just hoe it out because they knew that they couldn't let the weeds grow. And so we have all these different control strategies that are implemented over the last 100 years. So the question is how much you have on your land and what are you going to do about it? If you want to learn something about my dad, you just look up his book. He actually grew up, and I helped him before he died write a book about battleground memories, which is basically life growing up in the rural South in the Great Depression. But anyway, he was so focused on just never letting weeds take over any of the land there. It was just amazing. So this is EDRR, long-term management, okay, low cost, short-term impacts, or we let it go and you can see what's happening here. So the evolution of EDRR, to begin with, we had the large weed eradication programs like witchweed and goat shrew and crapina out in Oregon. And then we had, when I came along, we had the small weed eradication projects. These are federal noxious weeds. And then micro eradication projects where we want to find these things really quick to begin with, like giant Savinia we found in 1995 in South Carolina and eradicated it by the next year. By the mid-1990s, we were really beginning to understand that these individual single agency-led programs didn't work all the time because there was not enough money or not enough support or whatever. And so that is when we started forming the state councils. And the first one we formed was the Delaware Invasive Species Council in 1998 and the Wyoming Weed Team in that same year. And so these councils and task forces like the Beach Phytex South Carolina's Beach Phytex South are examples of what we're talking about, of getting people to work together when a single agency can't do it all. And then examples of that right there. But then EDRR 3.0 is where I think you're going to make a difference because you're all land managers right there. And taking care of invasive species on the land that you own or manage, regardless of what your neighbor is doing, okay? So there is 1, 2, and 3. So I'll just go through this really fast just to show you and just ask you where you are. Are you a state noxious weed coordinator like Al Tasher used to be our national coordinator after I left APHIS, or a state coordinator, or are you a county coordinator, or do you manage land like this right here? Or do you have a backyard, and so just take care of your backyard? So the federal agency coordination started with the Federal Interagency Weed Committee in 1990, and then the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. And then we had a national council that was formed in 2000 and had a national plan that they've been putting into effect. And forming these state councils with strategic plans and visions. And just examples of these right here are the witchweed eradication program, which was actually, we found it in 1956. It's a parasitic weed of corn. And here's the seeds of it compared to tobacco seeds and mustard seeds and human hair. So you can see that when this thing was becoming a big problem in southeastern North Carolina in the late 1950s, they had no idea what was going on. They thought it was some kind of disease, and so they sent a sample of it up to NC State, just like this, a plant, corn plant, and they said they got input from a person there on sabbatical from India, and he said, "You've got witchweed," and they said, "What is witchweed?" And so since then, they have, it's the one thing, it's an economically important thing. If this gets out into Iowa and all the places where they grow millions of acres of corn, it's going to destroy the American corn crop. So they have reduced this thing down from 432,000 acres over 70 years down to less than 1,000 acres now. And now they get about $800,000 a year, and they've spent $250 million to get rid of it. But if you look at why this matters, is that if we don't get rid of it, they're going to lose about $1 billion a year just in Nebraska. So there's no telling how much we would lose if we let it come here. What if it came to New York? New York has 34 million acres with about 1 million acres of corn produced a year, and about 163 million bushels here. That's really amazing. And you would lose $63 million a year if we let it come from North Carolina up here. I can tell you it's not going to, but if it ever does come up here by accident somehow, keep your eyes open. You don't want witchweed to get established here in New York. This is giant Salvinia, which we have eradicated throughout southeastern North Carolina. This is what it looked like on the northeast Cape Fear River near the, in 2002, and then it took us 4 years to get rid of it there. This was an interagency task force, EDR 2.0. Carolina's Beach Vitex Task Force, as I told you, is a threat to sea turtle reproduction. This is Betsy Brabson, a sea turtle volunteer. So they've done a tremendous amount of work with that task force to get rid of it in the Carolinas. And I wanted to show you this right here because sometimes you may can relate to this. The area that I started working in the 1980s, it was really difficult because we had so many people who were just sort of against us. They said, well, you can work on witchweed, but I want to hear about the rest of this stuff you're trying to do out there. But then in 1995, we had somebody come along. I don't know if you remember him, Bruce Babbitt. He was the governor of Arizona. Before that, he was a rancher and a lawyer. He became the Secretary of Interior under Bill Clinton. And when he came in, he said, get out there and do that because we have got to do something about weeds in the West. We can't let this go on because it's costing us too much money out there. And so for 5 years is what I call the golden era of invasive species management. Not because we were so smart, but because there was somebody up here who said, go do it. And that really led to all these councils and things like that because guess what? When he left office in 2001, I got to tell you this. We started having meetings with the next secretary and other people like that, and they said, why are you people so worried about weeds at the local level? Don't you know what we ought to be doing? That's a local problem. This was at the Interior Department in Washington in a meeting in 2001. Said, you know what we need to be doing on public lands, right? I don't want to hear about weeds again. We need to be drilling for oil on public lands. So guess where we were? Right back where we were here. That is why these councils and task forces and what you're doing matters so much. Because I can tell you, I've been there. These people will come and go, and they are so awesome when they're there, but the other people have other priorities, and I'm not criticizing them because I can't put responsibility on him or anybody else, but I say, we got to do it. We've got to do it. We, as a group of people, we can't let their priorities take over and just stop everything. That is why the task forces and everything else work so well for this because they're always going to be there. You're always going to be there. It is your life. It is my life. Wavy leaf basket grass, I won't go into any more details, but this is one that is spreading up your way. You can tell that it's been found in Pennsylvania. This is something that you need to be keeping your eyes out for, wavy leaf basket grass. This is one that we already have that's very similar to it. Japanese stilt grass, everybody's got it. But this is one that is coming. Here's another one that's an aquatic weed that is coming your way that is a big problem down here near Charleston, and it is one boat ride away from coming to New York State. Just come right up I-95. I'll try to stand there at mile marker in Lumberton, right there at mile marker 15. Is it 15? And say, stop your boat and clean it. But I don't think they'll stop for me there. But how far is it up here to that? Okay. Did anybody remember Les Meerhoff? He was the absolute best. So like I said, he's on another planet somewhere doing great things. But this is a picture of him with Oriental bittersweet about 2005 or something like that up there in Connecticut. But my wife and I visited the farmer's market in Asheville in 2008, where this thing is actually growing. You can see over here, all back in the mountains. And they were actually selling it as ornamental porch wreaths. And what blew my mind was I couldn't believe they were doing it. But they don't regulate it back here in North Carolina because it's too widespread. They regulate it over here, but not back there. But anyway, when we walked out to our car, we saw somebody was actually putting it in their car. And guess what their tag on their car was from? Kentucky. So they were taking that thing right there back to Kentucky. And that is what we're talking about, is how we can educate people to say, wait a minute, let's just think about this before we do this. And here it is. This is Kogon grass that is such a dire threat to Venus flytrap native habitat in the Carolinas. This is going to be spread. It's spread on the front of trucks and trains and things like that. So it could actually come up here on a truck or a train. This is where it wasn't here in 2007. It's now here in North Carolina, in the Carolina coastal plain. So we got to really try hard to get things going in the Carolinas about this one. This is another EDRR challenge for us. This is the challenge my wife has to work with the Science Museum in Raleigh to try to get something going to protect the native habitat of that. So she does tissue culturing with Venus flytraps so that people will not go poach it out there in the Carolina coastal plain. So here's one more. This is coming your way. This is Bradford pear. Here's where we have it down here. And here's where EdMap says it's growing up in your area right here in Lower Hudson area. But I wanted to show you this right here. I'll never forget coming back from a trip in 2010, and I was landing, this is the Charlotte airport. I don't know where I was coming back from. But as we were landing on this strip right here, I was looking out the plane over here, and I noticed that it looked like the dogwoods everywhere were just so beautiful in the woods. And then when I got down, I realized that they were all Bradford pears in the woods. These woods over here across the road from the airport were totally full of Bradford pears. I'm going to try to stop. But then when I saw this right here, this is Bradford pear that were planted here. They didn't have to be planted here, but they were right here. This is an example of what we're talking about. We make these decisions. So we have all these databases we can put things into, like the Invasive Plant Atlas in New England. And but Chuck Bargeron is somebody, if you don't know him, you need to get to know at the University of Georgia with EdMaps, because we can actually put our information off our phones right into the database, right into the EdMaps there, right? And so the one we use down south is Southeast Early Detection Network. So 7 steps for protecting the land that you work on. And I sent a fact sheet out that will have this for you on there. Get organized, put more eyes on the ground, look around, report your field data, tell somebody, assess the problem, and do something about it while you can still do it. Don't let kudzu take over here. Make a plan. So we have this environmental ethic, as I said, that Rachel Carson had so much great things that she taught us as a baby boomer generation. What we need now is a biological protection ethic for the 21st century. And this is something that I think a person like Doug Tallamy could really help us with. How do we put this into writing or something and then get it out there into the public so that they train the next generation of 6-year-olds like they taught us in 1963? I really feel like that is very important, that we have an biological protection ethic. You can kill a roach and won't go to jail, but you can't kill a person, okay? Because it's the ethic of why we think our life is more important than an insect, okay? So we need an ethic that says we got to protect the environment and do what we need to do so that 500 years from now, things will be as good or better than they are now. So, the Land Manager's Challenge. And one last thing. I want to pass on what I've learned in my life and my career to the next generation. So my wife Becky and I developed these online classes that we first offered through her college, Southeastern Community College, from 2008 until she retired in 2015. We're now offering them through the North American Invasive Species Management Association. I remember all the stuff I learned was mostly from Bob Epley. He died several years ago, but what I want to do is pass on what I have learned. And so what we're doing is passing it on to the next generation. And 3 people that are in your area that I want you to know about are Sarah Lyons in Syracuse, New York. She is one of our students. Matt Simonelli from Bloomingdale with a G, New Jersey. And Matt is supposed to be here today. And Matt, are you here? Yeah, right here. Matt Simonelli. The next generation right there. He's taking our second class right now. And Hayden Richardson. I had no idea it was a town called Westbrook, Connecticut. Until Hayden Richardson from Westbrook signed up for our classes. He's taking IBS 110 right now. So anyway, this is our way of passing on to the next generation what we have learned. These are 2 of our graduates, okay? Jonathan Short is the head of the invasive species program at the North Carolina State Parks in Raleigh now. And Shauna Lehman is the invasive species coordinator for the Saskatchewan Ministry of Highways. And I love what Shauna always says to everybody. She says, I got my passion for invasive species by taking these classes. So if you know anybody who is just getting started in this and they want to see the big picture and get a broad foundation, take these classes. That's what it's all about, is getting these classes. So, anyway, take the pledge. I promise to do my best to do my duty to detect and eradicate new weeds from all lands that I own or manage. Write this number down. There's 36,000 out there. We have about 3,000 of them here. There's 33,000 more coming our way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy. So he touched on a couple of things, and I think we are on our way in New York in developing this biological protection ethic. At the state level, we do have curriculum going into K through 12 on invasive species. So if any of you is a teacher or wants to learn more about that or wants to share that with your schools, please ask us. The other thing I want to point out too is EdMaps is used by most states throughout the US, but here in New York, we also use IMAP invasives, which is also an incredible resource and a way that you can document any observations you see here in New York. So last up this morning is Dr. Carolyn Sears, and she's going to kick off what we're calling into the afternoon is our PRISM Partner Showcase. And Dr. Sears is, she is chair of her conservation board in Pound Ridge, New York, and she is also co-director of the invasive projects Pound Ridge. And so she's going to present how this program developed and really grassroots activism at its best. Let's welcome Dr. Sears.
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here with Randy and with Doug and with 500 people, really, and with my husband of 50 years. So I'm here to talk to you about grassroots activism in the town of Pound Ridge, which is 55 miles north of where we are. We're about 23.5 square miles in size and about 5,000 residents. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Invasives Project Pound Ridge and what I've learned along the way. So let's see if we can do this. So it started about 2012 over a cup of coffee in Blind Charlie's with a friend of mine when I turned to her and I said, I've really had it with these invasives, we've got to do something. And she said, all right, we'll do it, but we'll do it the right way. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what she had on her mind, okay? But we spent some time developing a mission statement. We also thought about our name, the Invasives Project, TEP. We had really reached sort of the tipping point. We hired a designer to come up with a logo, and we then, developed email accounts and a web page and Facebook places and things like that. We talked to local organizations to build a partnership, and we set about kind of creating our identity. Also, about the same time, the Lower Hudson Prism was forming, and we've been one of the first partners to join, okay? So, and then we went about working on publicity, and I really can't stress this enough, because if we are going to, one of our questions is, how do we get this message out? I'm a retired teacher of 35 years, yeah. Science, I might add, to middle schoolers. And I have to tell you, you have to do it over and over and over again, okay? You change the message a little bit, but you do it over and over again. And that same thing applies to getting this message across about invasive biology. So publicity, and many, many times you have to do it yourself. So whether it's social media or print media, we still have a local paper. I think I support it with my news articles. And I try to support it in other ways. It's really critically important. Pictures, you have to have photographs of local faces, people in action. That's what sells the newspapers. That's what people are looking for on Facebook, right? So develop your photo bank. That's one of the things that I learned. And if it means putting yourself in the paper, you have to do it. You have to step up to the plate, all right? I'm not really a publicity hog, but it gets it into the paper. The other thing you need to do is you need to know your stuff. You need to use credible resources. You need to be clear when it is your opinion. If you're talking about a plant that is aggressive and you think might become invasive, or has it truly been identified as invasive? We use the New York State lists, and because we're very near to Connecticut, we also use the Connecticut list, and we try to stay informed to what is coming up the pike and has not been identified. And being a member of the Lower Hudson Prism has been extremely useful in that getting information, attending local conferences, okay, and prepare your elevator speech. I said I was going to share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way. And then you just have to get busy, right? You have to do it. You have to have plant displays. We've done them for our neighbors link with some of the landscape workers. We've done it for our community. We've done tabling events at the farm stands, and we've done all kinds of presentations at the library, for the garden club, things like that. We've exchanged talents using our local naturalists as speakers, or native plant gardeners to talk about their gardens. But you have to get out there, and you have to do lots of stuff, okay? And you have to be prepared for the unexpected. So two neighbors decided they were going to take on the Japanese knotweed growing along the road. And before I knew it, they were saying, how do we get rid of the debris? Okay, and we filled that dumpster using excavators and backhoes and incredible amounts of human labor. It went to, not the landfill, it went to the incinerator. We also have experimented with putting goats to work, very kind of catchy project, I will say, and charismatic as all get out. 3 years, very, very expensive, and the verdict is still out. You have to talk to me next year. I have my doubts, okay? Lots of work parties, of course. Japanese stiltgrass is definitely here, as we know. And vine cutting. I will say this is one that I think I literally have seen a change in our community. So we hold an annual vine cutting event in the winter with Bob Del Tordo, who's like Mr. Vine Cutter himself, right? I know, God, Bob. So, right? The pictures are always amazing pictures when you look at the size of those vines. But I think the message has sort of gotten out to people, you know, that the vines growing on your trees along the road that I can see are undesirable. So it's kind of like letting your lawn grow too much. That's kind of some of the message we have to get across, isn't it? That this stuff is kind of unacceptable. And actually, I think there's a visible difference when it comes to Oriental bittersweet in my community. On the other hand, the porcelain berry is marching down the highways into my community, and you know, people are not so aware of how wicked that weed is. Okay, what have I learned? I've learned that you really need to aim for balance, right? All this getting the invasives has kind of a negative connotation that people get a little tired of. Balancing it with the natives, planting the natives, supporting the wildlife has that pull and that draw that supports it. You know, we take from the volunteers, so I need to give back to the volunteers. I work them hard. I have to give them something to that, you know, it serves as joy. Okay, so that striving for balance. So for my volunteers, I've arranged over the years for special visits, one to Carolyn Summers' garden, another one to Ellen and James Best, which is in Pound Ridge. They are the loving owners and caretakers of the Sarah Stein wildflower garden. And so we've had private kind of tours of these places. We've also had private invitations to collect seeds at native plant gardens. And then we have done public events too, where we've shown people how to clean and store native plant seeds. And we've also had winter germination workshops. People just sort of love, you know, that's what we really love, right? It's like, you know, it's not cleaning up the kitchen that I love, it's cooking, sort of. I'm not really the cook, right? And it's not, right? It's not really weeding the garden, it's planting that I love. So you know, finding that balance, I think, is very important. Okay, so we've also connected with the pollinator pathway. So this was started by Sarah Bergman in Seattle, Washington, an idea that really can work in any community. In Seattle, she was encouraging people to plant native plants in the little strips between the sidewalks and the street to connect to the parks and the pollinators there. In Pound Ridge, with our 2 to 4 acre properties, we are connecting to the 18 preserves that we have in the community by planting the native plants and supporting the pollinators. Okay, it's very, very appealing kind of thing. I have to say, when we set this exhibit up outside at one of the street fairs, people just flocked to that table. There is something about our native stuff that's so charismatic. There we go. Let me just, so this is what I really wanted to talk about. I think it's probably our greatest success with the invasives project is we will walk an individual homeowner's property with them to identify the invasive plants and the native plants. Obviously, one to reduce and the other to encourage and support. So I wanted to talk about how that happens. We've done it mostly for individuals, occasionally for some neighborhoods, which is really exciting when we do that. So the actual process, if you wanted to sort of replicate this, we need we have a scheduler, and the scheduler will reach out to the homeowner. We've provided lots of opportunities for the homeowner to sign up for a consultation at these exhibits, public displays, on our Facebook page, in the newspaper articles, throughout the growing season in particular. Then the scheduler will arrange a date with the homeowner, and then from our team of volunteers, pull together 2 volunteers. They go out to the property and they walk it. And we found that people love it. You know, this is, you know, it's your piece of heaven, right? Where you live. What's more important to you than that? And have somebody spend time talking about it. And we commiserate, because there isn't anybody who lives in Pound Ridge that isn't dealing with invasive species. So as soon as they realize that we're not there judging, that we are actually there with a great deal of empathy, it becomes very neighborly, for sure. Usually takes about 2 hours. The volunteers then make a list of the invasives they found in the native plants. They share that with me. I have a template that I put that information into and send to the homeowner with additional information about resources and basic management strategies and things like that. So that is sort of how it works. These are the key questions that I would like to see asked. I'm not sure that always happens, but these are questions I have asked myself as a gardener. One of the questions I look at my plants and ask is, what value does this plant add to my property? There was early in my gardening career, you know, I just wanted it for the beauty, the seasonal interest, the shape, the form, things like that. But now I want that plant to support wildlife. So I, of course, am transitioning this garden with more and more native plants. I got the message later in my career, but I've been gardening a long time, okay? I age you guys out by a lot more. All right. We'll talk about that later. And the second question that I have learned to ask myself is, do I really want to be a source of biological pollution? I'm here to tell you, you know, I studied biology way back before they were using the term invasive. It just wasn't part of it. We talked about natural succession. I believed in natural succession, okay? It doesn't happen anymore where we live, that's for sure. When I first started to learn about invasive species, I looked at some winged euonymus in my yard that had been planted there, I'm sure, by the birds, but they were just like in the perfect place in the gardens, I have to admit, and they were mature bushes. It took me a while to get rid of them. But when the concept that this was a form of biological pollution really sunk in, then I couldn't wait to get rid of them, okay? But so those are 2 questions that I encourage my volunteers to raise with homeowners. I'm not sure they always do. So here's some of the information. Actually, I'm not sure what it means, but in terms of marketing, you know, when you have percentages. But in Pound Ridge, we have about 2,000 homeowners, pieces of property. We have visited 81 of those properties now over the years. Or 7%, that's the percentage that I don't know what it means, except it's feeling like there's a buzz in my community, all right? It's feeling like people are aware of the invasive species. One concern I have is I think some people feel like they're gonna take care of it, you know, and that they don't have to take care of it, so we have to keep working on that. We've reached 238 acres at this point. There's some interesting numbers too. If you look at 2018 and 2019, our requests for consultation have really gone up significantly than our earlier years. And then if you look at how many consultations we've done, both in 2018 and 2019, it's roughly half of those requests. Sometimes at these events, I think people sign up for a consultation because it's sort of like, you know, humoring us, you know, making us feel good to all sign up for it, you know what I mean? And then they, you know, and they never really wanted it anyway. So they, when the email comes around, they don't respond, or our emails end up in spam. I'm not exactly sure what happens between the request and the actual consult, but that's where we stand. We're getting there. So back again to a little bit more of the details. If you're interested in doing this, you need to recruit a team of volunteers and your scheduler. You really need somebody who's comfortable with the computer, comfortable with spreadsheets, comfortable with the calendars that you can manage on the computers. And then create those sign-up opportunities at different events or Facebook page or websites. The Google Sheet allows us to coordinate internally with a few people and share that information. We use release forms. Actually, several attorneys said to us, you will use release forms. Other attorneys have said it doesn't mean anything. They can still sue you. But the homeowner signs a release form, and our visitors, our volunteers sign one too. Not to, you know, we're not going to sue each other. The homeowners sign a release form saying that they would not accept any edible advice from us regarding the edibility of mushrooms or plants or things like that, and the use of herbicides. That's a really important one to me for many reasons. One, of course, we want to minimize any use of herbicides, but I actually do not want my volunteers to give advice because so many people get it wrong, right? And then the homeowners can also misinterpret it. There are just too many places that can be wrong, interpreted certainly the wrong way. I told you that we have a template that we then summarize the information, and we're gathering metrics along the way. And a reminder, always keep it simple because everything gets a little more complicated, right? A couple of the challenges, most of our volunteers have to have some plant wisdom about them. They need to know the invasive species and the native plants, but we do try to provide a little more training along the way. We did try to do some IMAP invasive training, but it was early on and the system was still quite cumbersome. I need to revisit that with my volunteers. We encourage the use of iNaturalist because it does collect data about the area. And Seek is a new app that I want to introduce to my volunteers. We meet once a year, just once a year. After that, it's all communication through email. And the other thing, though, that I do try to get across to the volunteers is this is really about early detection and rapid response. You're going to their property, you're going to identify Japanese barberry, it's here to stay. Winged euonymus, it's here to stay. Oriental bittersweet, we're stuck with it. We want it to be reduced, okay? But we're not eradicating those populations. I want you to look for the stuff that doesn't belong there. The plant that you say, that's growing in the woods and I've never seen it before, we want to find out what that is. Okay? And we've actually had some very important success stories along that line. Every one of these has a story behind it. They're almost always connected to the PRISM, the Lower Hudson PRISM, and to NYBG, to the staff here. We identified hardy kiwi. Sapphire berry was the first time it was identified in Westchester County. It was found in Pound Ridge. Jupiter sage, a friend said to me, I'm like the plant lady of Pound Ridge. That's how I'm known, you know. They go to the townhouse, they call up, they say, how can I talk to that plant lady? And they, right, that's what, you know, right. You just want them to say that crazy plant lady. But anyway, right? Okay, Jupiter sage, somebody said, somebody gave me this plant. They said it's great. Deer don't eat it. I forgot the name. I found out what the name of it is with the help of a friend here at NYBG, and now we are busy eradicating it because Jupiter sage covers acres of land in the Catskills. And we've possibly found some escaped Paulownia, Japanese hops, and I've had false alarms like giant hogweed, but I don't mind going out and checking it out because it means they're aware and they're looking at what's happening in our community in terms of the plants. So I just need to say, all of these activities really work together because there are so many people that have worked together, and I just bet if I asked those people to raise their hands if you've had any connection to the invasive project, we'd probably all be surprised to see how many people in this room have done something in Pound Ridge. Yeah, really. So my mom could spot four-leaf clovers. Maybe you can in this picture. She found hundreds of four-leaf clovers. My dad couldn't recognize poison ivy for the life of him. 3 leaves and he didn't touch it, okay? Plant blindness exists. We're not going to get everybody on board, but we need to keep working on getting the message out. Okay, I'm convinced it begins with awareness, when people begin to become a little bit aware of what the problem is, and then they start to see it. So that if people are driving home tonight or today, when they look at our woods and they see the winged euonymus grow in the red leaves of the winged euonymus, you start to realize the extent of invasive plants. Or in the spring, when you start to see the Japanese barberry greening up early in the spring, then you get that awareness of, holy cow, look how extensive it is. And after that comes alarm, and after that comes action. So those are some of the steps. So this poor little box turtle is a little beat up, but occasionally I have a box turtle stroll through my yard, which is on the threatened species list. And it's a reminder to me of part of why we're really trying to do this: reduce the invasives and introduce the natives. Just one last word that I forgot. This is my advice from my box turtle. Okay, but one last thing, and that is the words that we choose, okay? We need to be very aware. In this room, you've got background, but we need to be very aware that words like diversity, ecological restoration, ecosystem, habitat, those are geeky science words that many, many people don't understand. Their eyeballs roll, their ears close, okay? We've got to be very careful about our language. So let me stop there. Thank you.
So thank you all. I really want to create a word map from those talks. You had such great terms. There were, things that I had never heard before. This biological protection ethic, the homogecene. I like that better than Anthropocene. Yeah, it is easier to say.
Homogecene.
Homogecene. Our ecological bank account. Yeah, so.
Doug will put it in his next book.
Really? Is it, or is that closed?
I can't hear anything. What are you saying? Something about a book.
So my first question for all of you, and something that comes up regularly here from students, from concerned citizens, are invasive species the symptom or the cause? And are we missing something else? And how does that play a role in our day-to-day action?
I would say they're a symptom and a cause at the same time. They're a symptom of our ignorance about how the world works. They're a symptom of the fact that we see plants just as decorations, so we bring these things in to decorate the world without recognizing all the ecological, all the roles that they play in nature. But they're certainly the cause of all the things I talked about at this, that the cause results from the symptom of our ignorance, yeah.
I think this is an example of our limitation of how we understand time and space. Because we're so, you can look back 100 years and say, yeah, you should have done that. But when you're right here, right now, what's it going to be like in 100 years from now? So we need to really think about that we're having impacts right now that we don't perceive, that we don't understand. And I think that, we need to have scientists, somebody look at this and help us to broaden our perspective of time and space, because I think if you think about it, it takes millions of years for these continents to spread out like this, but it takes 21 hours to go to Australia. And, sure, in another 5 million years, these things would spread from California to China because California is moving toward China, but in 30 million years. So it's how we're changing things in a way that just don't work on Earth. In other words, Earth has been here billions of years. So can you speak to that?
Let me point out what happens when California meets China, or what happened when Central America connected with South America. There was a great exchange of species, and there was a tremendous amount of extinction both in North America and South America because of that. That didn't happen overnight, but when you move species around, some make it, some don't. But we're doing it in an instant, and that's right. The problem.
Global.
Yeah.
So about this globalization and moving species around. Dr. Westbrooks, you brought this up in working at ports. One of the things that we are faced with here in New York are ports, and also something that's knocking at our doorstep, which we've talked a little bit about, that's spotted lanternfly. And how do we balance the management of things that are just coming with maintaining ecosystem function? So a lot of recommendations are trying to stop this thing. So it's going to involve either significant clear cutting or chemical use. And how do we balance those things once they're here?
Good question. Really good question. I think that we're so focused on all the things that are going on in our life and in our country right now, that those kind of things just sort of, they're out there. But I really feel like that we have got to back up enough to see, and I keep talking about Rachel Carson because she's from this area, and somehow she got everybody's attention. And so we need somebody who can think like that and sort of bring us, put our mind through this thing so that we can get people's attention to think like this, because there's not a direct answer to what you just said, except that we need to deal with things like spotted lanternfly as soon as we can, because there's a history of it being a problem. So we need to focus on those things, but we need to really think hard about how we're homogenizing everything up in the world. And maybe it just won't be such a big deal right now for 100 years or something, but in another 1,000 or another 5,000 or 10,000 years, the track we're on, at some point they're going to look back and say, no, you've got to stop. It's just that how long will it take us, Doug, to get to the point of saying, this can't go on?
I'm going to say it right now.
Right now?
This is where platitudes are great. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We can't pretend that, once it's here, we're going to make it all better. We're not going to make it all better. We can improve it, but spotted lanternfly eggs came in on Chinese rocks, decorative rocks, because we need decorative rocks from China.
We do. Everybody knows that. And oil comes out of the ground too, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah, so it comes down to a paradigm shift and consumerism, and right? So
I just want to stress education, honestly, because I will just, of all the things in my life, I look back on something that didn't mean anything right when it happened is when my dad poured out that oil and just looked at me like I was stupid. Like, oil came out of the ground, don't you? Who cares? I mean, we're just putting it back in there. And how different we as a generation of baby boomers, we were taught, and we just adapted immediately a new way of looking at things. So I think that you all are out there doing everything you can, but let's try to find it. You're interacting with the public all the time. And so, not too long ago, I gave a talk like this at the North Carolina Urban Forestry Society meeting in Winston-Salem. And this is what I told to them, is that you're interacting with the public all the time. And so let's try to educate them. But also maybe New York Botanical Garden can be really helpful in helping us figure out how to educate children, because there's really not too much going on. Like I said, I didn't learn anything about invasive species until I had finished my master's degree in botany at the University of South Carolina. It was an awesome experience. I loved my program, and I became a science teacher for a little while, and then I got this job, but it just blew me away. And so if here's somebody 25 years old doesn't know this in 1978, then I think that we need to think about what we can do to educate these children, so at least we'll start seeing some kind of shift in society's outlook within the next 20 or 25 years. But between now and then, what you're doing, oh Lord, that is just wonderful. Just keep doing it, because that's what we get out there. It gives me cold chills to think about it, because I've spent my whole life working on this, but then to see somebody is retired, but they're going out and getting people to go do it. Wonderful.
It's slow, but what I think there are components here that we need to understand about human nature. I often look at my own experiences as a learner to understand maybe how we learn things. And I'm thinking about times when, I'll give you an example, on one of these consultations, okay, going to a person who's now a friend of mine, going to her house, walking around, and seeing a little tiny, tiny plant, all right? And she said, I don't know, this thing just pops up all over the place. Those are always the clues, aren't they? But I took I'm taking a close look at it. I said, this is an orchid. And right away I was like, I want it. In my head, I'm a gardener. I'm just this gardener, right? And I'm like, man, I want this. Okay, but I identified it. It's helleborine. It's an invasive. The clue was, how do I get rid of this? It's all over the place. But that part of me that loved this plant, okay, is there. And I think we have to understand some of this stuff. And that's part of why on my list of things too, I say, be humble. Be humble, because you've probably made the same mistakes, along the way. I plant, I can't tell you, I've been gardening a long time, a real long time. And I've made a lot of mistakes. And I'm weeding those mistakes out. I'm cutting those down, and some of it is some of it's a little trust in the nurseries are not always right. So I bought beautyberry, beautyberry calicarpa, right? It's not quite a northern species, but native plant. Okay, then I see Daniel Atha in NYBG. He flies into the Lower Hudson Prison, looks me in the eye. Why me? He says, you got to get rid of beautyberry. He didn't even know I had it, but he knew I had it. Okay. He says, it's invasive. And I said, what do you mean native? He goes, no. If it's got a long pedicel, then it's not native. I go home. It's in the middle of the winter. I look at my plants. I can see it's got the long pedicel. Meanwhile, I had learned that I could propagate the plant, okay? So now I'm getting rid of the ones I paid good money for. I'm getting rid of the ones I propagated. I'm, on my own property. But it keeps you humble, right? It keeps you humble. And it also shows how much we have to learn about all of this. Still, this is still pretty new stuff.
I just want to say one thing about, Randy says we should teach the kids, and absolutely we need to teach the kids. I 100% agree. But we can't wait for that. There's a real sense of urgency here, so while we're teaching the kids, we all have to act immediately. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say one last thing about education. We had two sons, and our son John, his daughter John Westbrook, is sitting right up there. He's a physical therapist, so he grew up hearing all this stuff his entire life. Can you imagine listening to this every day? Now, he didn't turn out to be a biologist like this or an invasive species specialist. He's a home health physical therapist, but he has a completely different perspective than the average person. And so that's why I feel like education is so important, because he sees this, he understands what we're talking about, but he went off in a totally different direction with his life and career. But he has that perspective of what I'm talking about there. But yes, that we can't just, but that is one element of what we've got to do. But what you're doing is the other part, is actually go do it.
Great, thank you. Well, let's open it up. Does anybody have any questions for the group?
Microphone right here, so I'm gonna 1, 2, 3, 4 up there, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Michelle. This is very exciting to be here. I'm new to being aware that all these beautiful things that are growing are taking over our lives. I live in an apartment building, so when I walk out into Yonkers, Westchester, and I pass a beautiful bridge in the neighborhood, and it's growing all these gorgeous little purple flowers, part of me thinks, okay, next season I have to carry my clipper with me, and I want to just cut it off the bridge, and then I don't know what to do with it. Can I throw it over the side? The second point is, as I'm walking through a business park, I make a phone call to the manager. I finally get a call back, and I say, you've got this invasive stuff growing. It's physically gorgeous, but it's going to take over. What can you do about it? He says, oh, it's just not going to take over. You're just being overexcited. So the reality is I don't own that land. It's public land. Do I need permission to go in there and just, on a day, just cut?
Yes. Yes. So that's something Yonkers, it's Lower Hudson Prism can help you identify those. And we can figure that out. There's also a great organization working in Yonkers. They're called Groundwork, and they're here, yeah, or they're known. So yeah, I would look to them as your local source as well. But yes, you do need permission.
Just let me tell you another story. I really feel I'm full of stories like this. Okay, all right. You're talking about educating people. So I'm not just talking about educating children, because I know a young man down in South Carolina who loves to fish. Okay, he goes everywhere to fish, in Lake Murray near Columbia like that. And so I was talking to him one day. Have you seen hydrilla out on Lake Murray, which is in Midlands of South Carolina, down near Columbia in the middle of the state? He said, isn't it wonderful? He said, you know what? We need all the hydrilla we can get. I said, are you insane? He said, well, the little fish, they stay inside the big mat there, and when they come out, the big fish grab them. So we want all the hydrilla we can get so we can catch 25-pound bass. I said, oh my God. What are we going to do? Because we need to teach fishermen about hydrilla. I talked to him for an hour, and he did not. It took me all day long to get him to understand what I was talking about. But he said, oh, that's going to mean I can't catch big fish anymore. So we got to educate people.
If we were serious about this, we could, I don't want to talk about top-down regulation, but in England, it is illegal to have Japanese knotweed on your property. Period. It's illegal. If you have it there, you must get rid of it or you're fined. So if the person you're talking about, if we had a rule like that, you may not have Oriental bittersweet on your property, that's almost giving you permission to go and help him out, because he's going to get fined if he doesn't. Most people don't know it's there. They don't care. It's not that they're trying to protect it. They just don't want to invest the labor. So you can't get rid of it legally, but you can get rid of it illegally. Just saying.
Yeah, I had sort of a twofold question. One is how climate change is impacting what we now consider to be native in a particular area. And also, what about native insects that are disease vectors? We have Aedes aegypti now bringing dengue here because of climate change, I assume, and others bringing chikungunya virus to places it's never been before. So how do, are mosquitoes, Are they, even if they're native,
They're not
do we
native.
still not like them?
Aedes aegypti is from Egypt.
Right, no, I understand that, yeah, but, yeah, I understand that, but there's.
Can I? Let's do the climate change one first. I'm glad we're using climate change instead of global warming anymore, because what's really happening is increased climate variability. So right now we're actually in a cold snap. We are much colder than normal for November. They've already had a polar vortex in the Midwest. If we start moving plants up from the south so that they will do better in a warmer climate, we get those cold snaps, and it's going to kill them. So what we have to do is figure out how we plant for really increased variability, because that is what the plants have to handle. So we might want to think about, we plant an awful lot of cultivars of native plants, almost all of which are clones, zero genetic variability. That may not be the way to deal with climate change, but the gradual warming of the climate is something that happened over decades, centuries, but the increased variability is happening right now. And it's very, very hard on the plants. It's drier, it's wetter, it's colder, it's hotter. So just saying, well, we're going to move them north, I don't think. That's also taking plants away from their co-evolved community and moving them out of range of what's normally interacting with them. So I'm not a big proponent of assisted migration. That's what it's called. And you'll have to tell me about the native insects that are spreading diseases, because the two mosquitoes you just named are not native. They're both introduced. So, pine bark beetle. Okay, all right. It's not spreading a disease. It's just killing the trees on its own. Yeah. All right. There's a couple reasons the pine bark beetle is bad. Climate change is one of them. But the fact that we discourage fire and we have all even age plants, pine trees that are exactly the age that the pine bark beetle loves. It used to be a mixed age forest. So you had young ones and old ones, and you never had it dominated by all old trees, so the populations never got as large as they are now. You get these interacting factors, but suppressing fire is a major cause of pine bark beetle overabundance throughout the country at this point.
Another question over here.
Thank you all for sharing your expertise. Dr. Sears, I have a twofold question for you. The first one is, do you do any consultations outside of Pound Ridge, such as
Do you remember
in
seeing
Newcastle?
on one of the slides, set your boundaries?
Oh. Okay.
I've had a number of requests, but literally you need to set boundaries.
Okay. And the second question is about vines. Cutting down vines. I'm on the board of my home association, and we have a lake, and there's a section of the lake that goes along a road, and all the trees there have vines on them, and I have suggested that we go out and cut them. And they say, in fact, there's an environmental lawyer in the neighborhood, and he says, well, the trees are dead, and the vines are making a privacy wall from the street. So
Why are the trees dead?
so they're thinking, well, it's a fait accompli now, so why bother taking the vines down?
Because they're tumors. They're ecological tumors that keep spreading. That's the message. I don't like talking about just cutting vines. We have native vines. We've got native grape. We've got Virginia creeper, both valuable plants. You shouldn't go out and just cut every vine you see. Although most of the vines you see are Oriental bittersweet and porcelain berry, and yeah, you do want to cut them. But know your vines before you start cutting. So preserving them for a privacy screen, that is not a good ecological argument. We'll just pretend we didn't hear it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm all the way up here with another question, and I do just quickly want to say that I don't know exactly where the 7 speakers that will be speaking in the afternoon are from, but there might be some consultation opportunities for the question asker from one of those 7 that are going to be speaking in the afternoon. Here's another question.
Hello, thank you. I'm actually from Europe. So in our discussion about biodiversity, agriculture is always a big thing. And how is it here? Isn't agriculture and monoculture a very big problem for, or providing grounds for invasive species to actually spread so much? Or is it more the little things? Does that make sense?
Okay. Here we've got, we use a lot of Roundup Ready products, a lot of corn and soybeans where you just spray Roundup on everything, and so nothing's alive except the corn and soybeans. Our agriculture, particularly in the Midwest, doesn't harbor all that many invasive species. What it does is get rid of the productive native weeds that we need. We call them weeds. You know, a weed is a plant out of place, and our native plants are not out of place. But so that's why we lost the milkweed and the asters and all the things that support the monarch during their migration. These days, when growers do keep a hedgerow, and hedgerows are where most of the biological diversity in agriculture used to reside. Now they're totally invaded by non-native plants, and that is a problem. So what we need to do is clean up the hedgerows, put them back in most of our farms. Most of our farms have gotten rid of the hedgerows for giant agricultural farming. But make sure that they're built out of the productive native plants, not the invasive species.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to add to that, and I think one of the things that's starting to drive this, maybe, at least I'm hopeful, is the whole pollinator crisis.
Exactly.
And so bringing back our native pollinators and having the native plants to support them to improve the agriculture production is a big push, or at least a sign of hope.
Right. One quick comment about that. Sorry. That's not the only reason we need pollinators. We hear all the time why they pollinate a third of our crop, but they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. So if we lost our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet, and that is not an option. It actually has nothing to do with our agriculture. We've got to preserve diverse pollinators everywhere to keep the plants around.
I do have a couple other questions, but I just want to introduce myself quickly. I'm the director of adult education here, and so we really care about education here at the New York Botanical Garden. We do have a huge children's education group as well. So, but I do, just because Rachel Carson has been mentioned a bunch, now pollinators, I'm just going to throw it out there. We're planning our spring-summer catalog, so this isn't for sure yet, but we're looking to have a big pollinator day the week of Earth Day, for Rachel Carson, et cetera, to celebrate that. So please stay on the lookout for that. And I'm going to pass the mic to this lady right here.
Thanks. I work on a small diversified farm as a beekeeper. And one of the things I am noticing is that in the areas in our woodland borders where we have some knotweed, that it hosts the greatest diversity of pollinators. Please say something, and then can you also say something about mugwort?
Okay, quickly, pollinators. So how many weeks is it in bloom?
A couple at a crucial time of year, though.
Yeah, but so let's say it's in bloom 2 weeks. I'm willing to bet that most of those pollinators are honeybees. So okay, non-native bee, but it's not hosting any specialized bees, and it's only in bloom 2 weeks of the year, and the rest of the year it is preventing any other blooming plants from growing in that space. So pollinators need continuous bloom in this area from March all the way to early November, and knotweed's filling in 2 weeks there, but the rest of the time it's preventing blooming plants from any other place. So again, this is looking at the pluses and the minuses and deciding which one is greater. And it also isn't staying where it is. It keeps spreading and spreading and preventing other plants that support the pollinators from blooming. Mugwort. Mugwort. I was thinking of the other one. Mugwort. What do you want to talk about mugwort? Mugwort is one of those things. It comes in an early disturbance. Disturbance is invasive plants' friends. If we could stop disturbing every place, we would have fewer problems. So mugwort comes in right away as you get past the disturbance. And particularly if you have other plants, it actually can be outcompeted over the years, and it'll disappear on its own. But that's what I hear. I'll pass it to Randy.
Hi. Can you tell me if there's been any research on the quantity of pesticide use required for this work? And if so, how much, if you quantified the effect that would have on insects compared to all this data on the invasives and introduced plants?
I don't know of anybody who's quantified it. But first of all, we're talking about herbicides. If you don't kill the roots for a lot of these things, particularly the woody ones, you never win. They just keep coming back. So it is true. You want to minimize the use of herbicides. So one way is to not spray the plant. It's to cut and paint the stump. That uses much less material. But that opens the space so that you can have the plants that actually support the insects. The herbicide itself aren't hurting the insects. It's the presence of the plant that doesn't support the insects that are really hurting the insects. But I just, maybe somebody in the audience can help me out here. I've heard about this new technique that they say works. I haven't tried it. But now you cut the stump and you leave it up a little bit and put a black plastic bag over it for the summer. And supposedly the lack of air and sunlight will kill the stump with no herbicide. Has anybody tried that? Does it work? So, well, anyway, we are looking for pesticide-free ways to do this, but I'm still suffering from buying my property, running out onto it, cutting bittersweet vines the size of my leg the day we signed the papers, and I did not treat them. So 19 years later, I am still fighting the root system from those giant bittersweets because I didn't kill it in some way. So trade-off. Think of it as chemotherapy.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions that really get to the sort of the bigger systemic issues that may be involved that I think we often overlook. One is the impact of suburbanization. We here in New York are the home of Robert Moses, the godfather of trying to kill rail and spread sprawl. And we can see all these, especially the old highways, they're just loaded with porcelain berry. I mean, it's like kudzu down south. So that's one, is bigger development patterns. The other is within natural areas, especially within government systems. In all levels of government, we see this issue of capital spending versus maintenance. And I think that's been a real tremendous problem here in New York City, where we've spent millions on tree planting and other things while not having a careful plan, a really strategic plan to get rid of invasives.
Okay, we have a question. Do you have a question?
Well, I'd just like some comments or reaction to those things and the degree to which interest in invasive species might address those kinds of systemic problems. Can we use this as leverage to get to a broader issue?
Are you talking about minimizing development? Because
no, or making smart growth.
Smart growth, yeah, sure. I'm all for it. I talk about trying to take the areas we have developed and making them a little more ecologically friendly by putting the right plants in those spaces. But if we can, what you're talking about is limiting growth at some level. The planet's not growing, and if we continue to increase the human population forever, nothing's sustainable. We're all going down the tube. So how do you grow forever? You can't. But smart growth means, I don't know what that means.
More density, public transportation.
Yeah.
Less sprawl.
In the interim. But at some point, somebody's got to put the lid on. We cannot grow forever. Porcelain berry is up and down our highways because people buy it at nurseries and it gets out and the birds spread it. And we're still selling it in nurseries. So it doesn't make sense.
I have one last question over here.
Thank you, Lisa. This is related to Dr. Sears and Mr. Ptolemy, or is it Dr. Ptolemy? I'm sorry. I'm a newly minted PhD, so I'm into quantified information. So I saw your graph that showed the relationship between function and species. I'm really interested in what were the factors that you used to measure environmental or ecological function? And the second part is there any way to transfer that measure into the value that Dr. Sears was mentioning about how to stimulate interest in early detection and rapid response?
Well, let's talk about the graph first of all. You said that I measured. Did you notice the references I had? I didn't do those studies.
No, I'm sorry. The graph you showed. I know that you had abundance and you had species count, some other, and I'm just wondering if there are any other factors that made that up, or where I could refer to that.
I'm confused about which graph you're talking about. I had abundance and species diversity when I was talking about the insects that we measured in those invaded areas.
Right. Okay. So let's go back to the other graph. It didn't seem to have a unit of measure, but it did have a number of species.
It said, ecosystem function, right. So you can talk about productivity, how much energy is produced in that ecosystem. A lot of this is Don Tillman's work, came out of his labs where they're manipulating grass ecosystems that they planted and followed for 20, 25 years at this point. And other people around the world have done the same thing. They're fairly simplified ecosystems, but they're measuring stability, so how do the species maintain themselves over time, and they're measuring the amount of energy that moves through that ecosystem. They do have metrics that they're actually measuring.
So just very briefly, before we close completely, I just want to make sure that you all are aware. This is Doug Tallamy's new book, Nature's Best Hope. It's coming out in February. You can advance order it or pre-order it at the shop table in there, and we'll mail it to you in February when it comes out. So I just wanted to mention that. I also wanted to mention a couple other things. Definitely stay for the afternoon session. I think one of the hopes of having this day was for all of you to network with each other. There was so many questions that couldn't be answered, and I would guess that the folks up on this stage could answer them, but I bet there are also those of you who could answer them. So please stay, hang out. There's the cafe at lunch if you want to, or if you hang out around here, etc. This is our space for today, so please make use of it. I do also just want to put in a couple plugs. Like I said, I'm the director of the Adult Education Program, and there's quite a few urban naturalists who I see in the audience today. We do have an urban naturalist program that's growing and growing, with led by our expert naturalist Nancy Slowick, who's awesome, and it's a fantastic program. Ken Chaya teaches birds. We've got insects also being taught by Ken. We have urban ecology classes coming up. We're trying to get the dragonfly specialist to teach this summer, etc. So there's lots of great stuff. Nancy teaches native flora in all 4 seasons. So please take a look at our catalog. And then I also do want to put a plug in for the Eco-Flora project that is run by Dr. Brian Boom, who's here, and Daniel Atha in the back. Many of you are aware of this project, but just in case, they're working to, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but as far as I'm aware, they're working to document a lot of as we can, the native species here in New York City, but also they're looking at invasives. And so there's an eco quest every month. This month's quest is actually looking at the dangerous duo of Oriental bittersweet and porcelain berry. And the ask is for everybody to use iNaturalist app and to be documenting where those things are so that we can better help get rid of them and prevent them, etc. So Eco-Flora, just Google it, Eco-Flora NYBG, and it will come up. And I think Randy has something.
I just want to end this by saying something. I've been really inspired today in so many ways, but it took all of my life to come up with 3 areas for early detection and rapid response. You've heard the whole story. But to actually come up with number 4 today, it just blows my mind. And it's because of this lady right here, Carolyn Sears. All right, so we do individual programs through agencies like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, number 1. Number 2, councils and task forces, that's right. Number 3 was on your individual property. Number 4, We call it the Carolyn Sears, EDRR way. And that is, I want to challenge each of you to go back to your towns and do the same thing she's done. Talk about consultation. Just look at what she's done and do the same thing there. We need to do this in every town in the United States.
And
That is amazing. Okay, because like I said, I have given so many talks like this, but people will say, yeah, but I didn't give the actual how you go do it, other than with the individual agencies or something like that. Or how about back to your town, a volunteer group like she's done? That is amazing. That is the answer, what you've done. Thank you.
And just also to point out, in your email that we sent you to remind you to come today, we have the document that Dr. Westbrooks mentioned. His contact information is on there, so if you would like to contact him, you've got it. Just find that reminder email. So without further ado, please let us give a warm thank you to all the speakers.